This is Call with Dad's podcast, where today's issues, concerns, and joys of being a dad are discussed, with your hosts E.A. Maynard and Mr. Pancakes sharing their views, experiences, and all things they know. Join the journey with us. Welcome to Call with Dads, more than a podcast or a website, but your home for a community of dads who want to be better. Now let's get started.
So Tom, we have traditional parenting, which obviously Mr. Pancake and I both are fans of. Me, I don't understand this general parenting movement. You seem to have a better grasp on it than I do. I mean, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think about this kind of stuff a lot. Obviously, I've been a parent now for 13 years almost, and I've seen society change, and I've seen the opinions of society change, and done a lot of research on this stuff. I think that I personally, I don't really like being placed in a box in the first place when it comes to traditional parenting versus gentle parenting versus intentional parenting versus mindful. There's a million different terms that people try to use to describe different things, and there's really no hard and fast school of thought in relation to any of these things. I think that gentle parenting as a movement comes from a good place, but I think that at the end of the day, more of a traditional parenting style tends to be most effective. I feel like if we go back through the years, specifically in regards to the study of psychology, we know how to affect behavior in people. With the literature, the data has been established. We've got Skinner, we've got Pavlov, we've got all these different psychologists throughout the years that have laid the groundwork for this, and we really know how to affect changes in behavior. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah.
So again, I think gentle parenting comes from a good place, but I think at the same time, we've all seen the movie Bubble Boy, right? I feel like that's the cautionary tale, right, for gentle parenting to some degree. We're protecting our kids to such a heightened degree that it ends up causing detriment because they have no skills when they reach the real world. They're caught off guard. They have no understanding of how things actually work. Personally, my feelings on parenting in general, I know specifically when it comes to like spankings and things like that, this is the big hot topic.
Biggest one.
Pardon me, what's that?
That's the biggest one out of all of them.
Yeah, that's the most controversial, right? So when we start with kids at a really young age, I don't think that, we're talking like birth to the beginning of communication, right? When they start developing their communication skills, specifically in regards to language. I don't think physical punishment has a place really, right? I think redirection is generally the best way to go. I mean, even as adults, we have shiny object syndrome. I mean, 0 to 12-year-olds have the epitome of shiny object syndrome, right? It's so easy to redirect their attention from some sort of negative behavior. There's no reason to use force. And then then we'll skip ahead to, 6, it depends on the child, but 6, 7, 8, all the way up into adulthood, they have these critical reasoning skills. Their language skills are developed to such a degree that we can communicate the point behind why we want a behavior change, right? And we can start to use these psychological tools like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, which we can talk about later. But there's that weird period in the middle where the communication skills are lacking. They're starting to develop a personality. They've got a certain level of obstinance, resistance to correction or authority, however you want to look at it. And you just can't really always explain things. And there's a certain point there where an outside element of influence might be necessary. Now, if you can orchestrate that so that the environment causes the correction as opposed to a spanking, that would be best, right? Best way to know not to touch a hot stove anymore is to burn your finger, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but that's not always possible. And there may be situations where you may have to intervene. And I think it's on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we all know what insane looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen. I don't know if you guys have seen the videos circulating about it's the dude just beating the hell out of his kid in like some waiting room. Like that, obviously, that's absurd, right? Nobody has done that has any level of reason, but there is a certain point where it could be necessary, and then that's kind of my I say 2 cents, but that's kind of that's like a kind of a top understanding of kind of how I view things, right?
And that kind of seems to be the way a lot of people view it too. They view anybody and everybody who ever even remotely thinks of, some sort of spanking. Their automatic thought, if they're in that gentle parenting like thing where they're following all that stuff, they automatically assume I'm literally backhanding my child, my 5-year-old daughter, as soon as she mouths off. So it's simply not the case at all. Spanking like that is just, this should be almost every single parent. Spanking like that is almost crossing the lines into physical abuse.
Right.
Yeah, spanking should not be some sort of, and we've discussed it before on the show. Spanking should not be some sort of angered, approach. If you're angry or upset or anything, it should almost be like, all right, walk away. Time to take a break, clearly, and then we'll have to come back to it or something. Because clearly something's affecting you as well, and you're going to end up doing that, and that's inappropriate. That's just hurting someone. Yeah. And the child doesn't get any actual value out of that other than, oh, geez, I better not screw up. Otherwise, he's just going to beat the piss out of me. You know what I mean?
Well, what it teaches is don't piss off dad. And that's not good. That's not a good lesson to learn. I mean, obviously,
that's not the lesson.
But that's not the point of the spanking. And you're right. I think the gentle parenting community, they look at any kind of spanking as purely an emotional response. And that's certainly not the case.
Right.
I mean, there are situations in which you can spank your child and it's not coming from some sort of adverse emotional response to something they've done. Right? Like I just described. It's a logical, intentional decision that I've made that this is the best way to handle correcting this particular behavior.
Right.
So
and there's very
few
reasons to do that.
And now, the last guy we had on, he made a comment that kind of resonated in my head a bit. And I kind of wanted to get your thought on this as well. Is he talks about the whole issue that parents that are doing gentle parenting, they're putting their emotional weight onto their kids. And like my biological father used to do something similar to this because he had horrible anger issues. So he would go from either trying to put well, you disappointed me. You're going to make me angry. You're going to, and don't get me wrong. I make the same mistakes of, I tell my son, stop. Are you trying to make me angry? And it's not intentional. I'm not trying to, and because any parent that thinks they're perfect is full of it, but we all try our best, and we do know when to stop ourselves before we get physical or things like that, at least how we should be. But it seems like the gentle parenting is more focused on putting an emotional weight on the child, making them feel guilty, using guilt trips and using these
like an
emotional
manipulation.
you're gonna make mommy cry if you keep doing this. You're gonna, instead of like, for me, I'll tell my son or my daughter, she's only 2, so the logic area there is just starting to develop, because I think she's going to be my bigger test of all. But my son, I can sit there and say, no, do you know why this is not right? And he'll look at me and go, yes. Don't tell me you're sorry. Tell me you're going to work on not doing it again. Because anybody can say sorry, and I try not to go and pull the you're going to make me cry, you're going to make me upset. And like I said, I make the mistake. You're upsetting me. Are you trying to upset me? Everybody's going to eventually say something like that, especially if that's what you hear growing up. So I think both sides kind of have the extreme. Do you know much about gentle parenting in the sense of, are they pushing that emotional weight as much as it seems to me as they're doing, or is that more in my head?
So it's an interesting concept, certainly. And as you mentioned, all of these different parenting strategies are going to have the poles, right? There's going to be the extremes on both ends. And it certainly seems to me that gentle parenting as a whole is an attempt to help your child explore their emotions and the consequences of those emotions. And I don't think that anybody could argue that that's not helpful, right? I think it's important that our children grow up learning to understand their emotions, how their emotions affect their actions, how their emotions affect their thought process, the consequences of reacting to those emotions too rashly. All these things are important. And having discussions with your children is certainly an excellent tool, regardless of your parenting style, correct? But you're 100% right that it's very easy, and you see this a lot in the videos and things like that online. It's very easy when you're attempting to be a gentle parent for you to place, like you phrased it, the weight of your emotions on your child, right? And guilt. It's so easy to indirectly use guilt as an attempt to correct behavior, when obviously that's never the best option. It's never a good idea to try to guilt your child into doing the right thing. Now, we can talk about the application of guilt in regards to ethics and morals, but that's a whole nother discussion, and it certainly has a place. But when it comes to parenting, it's absolutely not the best tool, right? I mean, the woke, whatever term you want to use, they like to use the term toxic. Right? And I think that there certainly can be toxic gentle parenting, right? Now, I don't think that all gentle parenting is toxic. That's why I say I don't really like being placed in a box. But I certainly think there are toxic forms of gentle parenting, and utilizing guilt and things like that to try and change behavior in your children is certainly toxic. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It's another thing that you mentioned that to touch on really quick was about don't tell me you're sorry. That's something that I kind of have a little bit of an issue with too, particularly in my oldest child, who's 13. And I'm sorry. And I'll tell her all the time, I said, listen, don't tell me you're sorry, show me you're sorry, right?
All right.
Don't say you're sorry. Show me that you're sorry by changing your behavior. Make different choices next time.
Right.
And that seems to click. But again, like I talked about at the beginning, she's above that age where that reason and the intellectual development is starting to reach a point where you can explain these things to her and she can grasp those concepts. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like I teach my daughter about saying sorry and stuff, and we teach her that it is okay to say sorry, but only in certain aspects. So like how both of you were saying, like, some instances I teach her don't tell me sorry, show me, and then others are, I do kind of like what you do, Eric, and I say, I need you to fix the issue. Don't tell me you're sorry. But then, if there's something like something simple, like she's with like another, and she does something like smack another kid in school, I do tell her, hey, you need to own up to it and you need to apologize. Hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit you, stuff like that. But like I said, I separate the three and try. And obviously she's 5, so it's a little difficult to kind of do that. But placing the foundation for that information is kind of where we're at now.
Right.
Kind of setting that foundation. So.
And she's kind of at the break point where the physical correction is no longer going to be effective, and as a matter of fact, could be detrimental. Right?
Physical correction for my daughter has never been effective. It don't matter.
Never.
Well, I will
put a handprint on her tush one time and got a little harder than I should have, just simply because it was necessary at the moment. And she looked back at me and went, I was like, oh my God. Well, I guess spanking ain't gonna do it.
It's different.
Yeah. It's gonna say my kid, at least my older son, spankings worked for him, but a big problem is he's developed, and the reason I was kind of saying trying to cut back the sorry thing is because he's at the point of now he thinks if he says sorry, that just fixes everything.
Yeah.
And my whole thing is trying to teach him, like, yeah, I'll say there are times I'll say, okay, yes, I accept your apology, thank you, go do this. But I want to also try to teach them sorry is not the solution on all things. Saying I'm sorry is the is me. Don't play I'm sorry when you're not. figure out why you're doing this and fix it is
Right.
what I'm trying to teach. And I guess it's similar. I like how you worded it better, Tom, because your wording, my son's about to turn 6, so he's starting into that age where I think that will be more useful for me to word it that way than the way I have been.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what one thing I've always said I love about these talks and listening to other dads is not all of us have the same concepts, and there's no
And
way
learn
all of us.
different ways
Yeah,
too.
exactly. And I mean,
Hmm.
there's I don't agree with what I see from general parenting, but there are some things that you can learn to adapt into your
Yeah.
kind of like we said, don't put me in a box, because once you go in a box, then it's, well, this is what I have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
I feel like in the gentle, it's like how you were saying, Tom, the not putting someone in a box. I mean, that completely, to me, that makes 100% sense, simply because there's so many different parenting styles that could all be used for every different child. Because like some of my friends, they have a boy or whatever, and uh, they spank their kid or whatever, and the kid, and I'm not talking like a butt whooping. The kid does something wrong or mouths off, or whatever. It's more of a, what did I say? Don't do that. And then the kid's like, and it gets over it and it cries. It doesn't do it anymore, and it corrects the issue. If I were to do that to my daughter, forget it. So it's almost as if I have to, because of my daughter's personality and I guess strong will in a sense, I have to figure out a different way to deal with it, as well, almost combine spanking, but only use spanking in a very unique situation. Whereas some other ways I have to, almost grab her, stop her from doing whatever it is, change her mindset, and then come back and explain to her why that was incorrect. So I do use some gentle parenting aspects, but only, I'm a very traditional person. And my original thought when we first started this whole child thing and parenting was, I want to go traditional 100%. I want to do this, do this, do this. And just over time, it kind of just, that ain't gonna work. So got to figure it out this way and do this, try that. So we read different books here, different books there, and we learned different techniques. And I mean, there are parts, as like you were saying, Eric, parts of gentle parenting that it makes sense and you can use them. But you also have to, you know, be correct with your parenting as well. And I guess in a way, use your eyes, pay attention to the child, and if a spanking is what's required, I guess that's what you got to do. Because
Yeah.
I would rather my child have a bruise and a handprint on her ass from me wailing on her than her being smeared across concrete or asphalt because she ran out into the street for the fifth time today. You know what I'm saying? So that's just me. But yeah, there's situations like that when not just a pat on the butt, but an actual end whooping, like a good one, will correct that behavior. So
Well,
there's multiple different scenarios, I think, and boys and girls are way different.
yeah. Well, and every kid's different, right?
Right.
Right.
And that's an excellent point too. I mean, we talked about touching the stove, right? The best way to learn not to touch the stove is to burn your finger. That
Right.
there are some things that works with, and there are some things that aren't. Playing in the street is not one of those, right?
Not.
You don't want your kid to learn to not play in the street by getting smeared on the blacktop. That's not a good way.
Right.
And at the same time, there's the gentle parenting to the extreme, right? So you some of the attitudes in the gentle parenting sphere is, well, we don't use sticker sheets, we don't use rewards, we don't use any kind of physical intervention. We don't. Well, okay, if your kid's playing out in the street, are you going to stand on the sidewalk and say, okay, Johnny, come on now, let's get out of the street. We shouldn't play out there. You're going to get hit. That's a good way to get your kid hit in the car. There comes a point when Johnny's not getting out of the street. You snatch Johnny up and drag his ass to the sidewalk. You know what I mean?
I'm going to dislocate her shoulder because I yanked her so hard out. That's how hard. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and yeah, keep in mind too that, and this goes true for any type of parenting, whatever your strategy is. They teach this idea in leadership. Jim Rohn talks about it a lot, where You can shoot a rabbit with a cannon. It's effective, but you don't have a rabbit left when you're done. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
If the point's to have a rabbit when you're done, you probably shouldn't shoot it with a cannon. And that's the same idea, right? It's like there's measured levels of response that are appropriate depending on the situation.
Right. Absolutely.
And you could go to the extreme in either ideology. And it's interesting too, because I feel like a lot of people describe there's the adage of, well, it's better to be loved than feared. And depending on who you ask, they may believe that or not. And I feel like a lot of the gentle parenting, the people that believe the gentle parenting ideas will look at it as black and white, or traditional parenting is ruling with fear and gentle parenting is ruling with love. Well,
that's not the case.
I hate to say it too. I mean, any organized society across the face of this planet that's well governed, it's a balance of love and fear, right?
Right.
Police in and of themselves are a deterrent. They don't just respond to crimes that are already committed. In a sense, they prevent crime by their mere presence, right?
Right.
It's the same with the traditional parenting side of correcting your children. You can correct that behavior just by their understanding that dad is there to exact consequences if I should not follow these particular rules, right?
Right. Yeah. It's even in religion. You know what I mean? What does everybody say about God? I'm a God-fearing man. I'm a God-fearing man. That's what they say, so, in essence of love and fear, they do certain things and behave appropriately. So
now, granted,
it's all over.
New Testament Christianity is a little bit more love-based, right? The Old Testament's a little,
right?
Hey, they both have a place, right? There's a reason that when Jesus became prophet and the New Testament started to develop and become its own religion, they didn't just throw the Old Testament stuff away, right?
Right.
Because all of that stuff is applicable, right? Yeah.
Right. And here's the thing is, even with that in the New Testament, even Jesus used fear by going in and tossing the money changers' tables over in the temple when they were, and throwing people out and doing all this that were disrespecting his father's house.
Sure.
So, I mean, everyone tries to talk about how Jesus was purely love, this and that, and love the sinner, not the sin.
Right.
Well, the fact is there was a guy that, in fact, it was my pastor. Now that I think about it, we started a new church that we found here around us, and the one thing the pastor says is people tend to go to extremes with Christianity. Is they either think they have to be the lightning rod to correct somebody. This is the law. This is how it is, and this kind of goes along with what we're saying, or be the walking mat that people walks all over. Yeah, welcome to Christianity. It's okay. Whatever you want to believe is fine, as long as you're here and you say you're this and you pretend to be this. And the fact is there's a welcoming element you have to give to bring people in to your belief, just like your kids. If you want them to learn values, learn traditions, learn what it takes to be an adult, you have to be able to welcome them in without letting them run the show, without being the welcome mat. But at the same time, even though you're using a firm hand to say, no, here's the limit, you cannot whack them over the head saying, it's Sunday. We have to do this. This is Sunday. Tomorrow we can do this because it's Monday and all this. I mean, that's kind of like why I homeschool, is because I know with my son, if I sat there and said, okay, today, and I sent him to traditional schools and he sat down and they were like, okay, well, first we're doing math for a couple hours, then we're doing this for a couple hours, he'd be expelled in probably a week. Not, I mean, my son is, I was just testing him today to see if he could bypass first grade out from kindergarten, go to second. And he was doing well up to a point. I don't think there's certain areas he's not ready for, but it also, knowing that I can show him and I know where to be firm with him
Right.
and where to say, okay, here's what you need to work on. Let's talk about this or spend more time. And then there's other areas that I can sit there and say, you know this. This is just review. Stop playing, look at it, and let's work through it. So I think that element of learning the balance is a huge part in it, where, like you said, government, religion, whatever factors we're talking about, if you don't know the balance, then you're either going to have even the left side and right side of politics. You have the woke, like I've heard it mentioned, there's the left and woke, there's liberals, there's conservatives, and then there's the white right extremist. And, you can have extremists on any side, but if you're not willing to listen to conversations, kind of like what I said before about to you is I want any opinions if I agree with it or not, because if I was worried about you saying something that I disagreed with, I would have never learned, hey, if you word it this way, it might be more effective.
Right.
And that's the thing is when you are so extreme at gentle parenting or traditional parenting and all this stuff, you're not going to listen to other routes that might help you be a better parent. And we all need to be better. Let me skip gears real quick because like
Mm.
one of the big things is your your username on Twitter, earn her respect,
Right.
which is all about making your wife, making the woman that you're involved with respect you because you respect her. Now, as a dad, I believe that my wife and I need to be on the same page most of the times because there's no way we're going to be on the same page on everything we and what balance do you think comes or is needed when you go out because earning a woman's respect is important so that she respects you as well, but there has to be that balance there too. What do you suggest to men that are trying to find that balance so that they can build that good family?
Yeah, that's a deep one. So obviously my whole goal is to help men become better husbands, and that's been my focus for a while now. I started out doing one-on-one coaching, word of mouth, and then just recently taken to content creation on the internet to try and just be more effective and useful. And ultimately, specifically in regards to what you're talking about, I think that men in society are generally valued primarily, with a few exceptions, on their degree of utility and competency. And so I use the aphorism a lot when I'm working with young men. I say, listen, you need to become a worthwhile man. And that ultimately is what earns a woman's respect, right? Is being worth her while. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Developing all the skills associated with that, right? You need to be a provider. You need to be an excellent father. She needs to view you as an excellent father. You need to be an effective father, right? You need to care for her and love her like you promised to do when you made your vows. You need to go out and earn a living. You need to be respected in your community, not just respected by her. She'll mirror the respect that the community offers you, and you become respected in your community by becoming useful, right? It's unfortunate, but it is unfortunate that men are often valued primarily on their utility. But at the end of the day, it is the way it is. You can't change it, so you might as well learn to work within it, right? And the way you do that is by going out and becoming useful. um, so I guess that's kind of just a kind of scratches the surface. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Kind of, but what I'm looking at is once once you have the marriage, you've gone out, you've done what's needed to earn the woman's respect, be married, and you're working at keep doing it. How important is it, do you think, for like say the young man goes out, does all this, gets married, has the kids, and then starts slacking, starts, okay, well, I'm tired, I'm coming home from work. Let me just have a beer. Like I've cut for me, when I met my wife, for an example, is I would drink maybe 3 beers in an evening and did that for a while into our marriage. Weekends, I would have a couple more, all this. Then I got to the point where it's just like, okay, well, I get no benefit of drinking,
Hmm.
and I go, maybe I'll have a glass of wine on the weekends, and I'm fine with that because right now I have about 100 bottles literally of wine I have to get through, and I can only
Take your time.
pawn so much. Yeah, so I only have so much I can pawn off on my neighbors, and I'm making another 30 bottles now. So obviously, I haven't figured out the solution to cut back my supply. I figure it's simple there somewhere, but homemade wine is so much better than commercial bought. But the the whole thing is once you get there, the problem that I'm seeing or wondering is once a man gets into a marriage, it's easy to get comfortable. It's easy to get lazy.
Yeah.
And how much how much do you think that affects the children and maybe I think general parent and traditional parent people like that try to live the traditional life extremely might sit there and go, well, I come home, I expect my wife to do A, B, and C before I even sit my butt down on the couch to watch TV.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So yeah, so I understand kind of a little more now what you're talking about, and it's kind of obviously a meandering road of thought. But if
Right.
so, we're talking about once you're in a marriage, you've established a relationship with your wife, you've entered into a marriage, you might have kids now, and there's like that balance between, let's say, being that like rock, that like pinnacle of stoicism, and then also right, kind of letting your hair down and relaxing and being yourself and kind of um, falling into like that more recreational mindset. And it's definitely a difficult thing because uh, just like with social media, it's kind of the same idea. It's a slippery slope, right? It's so easy to kind of fall into that comfort and then things spiral out of control from there. So I guess ultimately the marker of when that's gone too far is probably, and this requires a degree of self-reflection or maybe coaching an outside eye, but it kind of at that point when your responsibility seems to start when your ability to fulfill your responsibilities seems to start suffering, that's at the point when maybe you need to start heading the other direction. It's interesting because when this kind of all ties together. You were talking, we keep talking about this idea of balance and falling somewhere between the two poles, and you talked about the political spectrum. And someone explained to me one time, yeah, I actually, to be honest with you, I think it was uh, it was Penn Jillette on an episode of The Blaze. So anyway, he explained the political spectrum in this way. He said that it goes from totalitarianism to anarchy. So from complete and total control to zero control at all. And talking about the general parenting thing or just parenting in general, that is the spectrum, right? It goes from being like that tyrant of a father to being completely distant and disconnected. And that's true of being a husband as well, right? There comes a point where you're like you talked about that pinnacle of stoicism, or you're just you try to exert total control over everything in your life and everything in your family's life, and ultimately that's detrimental, right? And on the outside looking in, you might think, man, that guy's got it together, but there are markers of that affecting his relationship negatively, right? Things like sexlessness and things like disdain that may not be outwardly obvious, and his wife's feelings towards him, or right, there's a variety of different things. And then on the other end, we talked about, like you said, you you become the alcohol. Not that you were an alcoholic, but you become the alcoholic.
Right.
You not to insinuate that.
It's okay.
You're jobless. You don't take care of yourself physically. You let your physical health decline. You let your mental health decline, and that's like the epitome of starting to allow your ability to fulfill those responsibilities. It just completely dismantles itself, right? And so there is a balance between there, because you don't want your wife to look at you um, like you're not approachable, right? Because that's obviously a hallmark of a good husband or a good father, is being approachable, right? Emotionally, or even physically. Um, but yeah, it's very difficult. It's a difficult balance, and like I said, it requires a certain degree of self-reflection, or maybe even an outside eye to come in and kind of give you a different point of view. But I think it falls on that same balance, that same spectrum. That spectrum is so applicable to so many different realms of thought, is that balance between totalitarianism and anarchy, or like all the control, total control and no control, or total involvement, no involvement, right? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And I mean, what do you think the balance comes out in? How does people find the balance? Because, like you said, most of us come back to balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to self-reflection, being able to honestly ask yourself the hard questions, right? Is what I'm doing affecting my family in a positive way? Is the way that I'm parenting my child beneficial to my child in the long run? Am I seeing the response that I want to see, or am I continuing to do the same thing because I feel it's right, despite the fact that it's not being effective, right? And these are, we have egos as men, right? We have huge egos, and it's so hard to ask ourselves these honest questions, and it's even harder to answer honestly.
Yeah.
And I said outside help can come into play. It's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
It is. And there are lots of strategies and things you can find all over the internet, and there are strategies that we teach and things. But ultimately, it's just a certain degree of self-reflection and being able to ask yourself the difficult questions. Yeah.
Right. I mean, in my mind, being able to come to those notions, I mean, for lack of a better term, I guess, is rock bottom. You know, you're not really going to come to terms with a lot of that stuff, and you're not going to step aside and ask yourself those questions. You're not going to, reflect or take other people's opinions. Most people don't. The majority of people are like, like you said, ego. I mean, even women. I mean, my wife is very much so egotistical. Not so bad where it's like uninhabitable, but she's like me. Strong-willed. Very very egotistical in ways. Very controlling in ways. She has to be the boss and the leader in ways, and so am I. I'm the same way. With certain things. Just how it is, and I'm not going to step aside from my own opinion and recognize that I'm incorrect, or maybe I should let somebody else take the lead, or maybe I should do it a different way or try a different way, unless I get hit by a car and hit the bottom, and go, oh God, oh Jesus, yeah, you're right, that was wrong,
that moment of desperation.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, and the rock bottom doesn't literally mean, you're in a ditch, been drinking for 12 months straight and your beard's this long, and you haven't brushed your teeth in 35 days. That's not the literal term of rock bottom. Rock bottom is more of a metaphor for the lowest point or whatever in any situation. So
well, and you can reach rock bottom in certain areas of your life and not others, right? Rock bottom in your marriage doesn't necessarily, it's not going to, like you described, is not going to be the transient on the street, alcoholic and unkempt. It just means that you have serious marital issues that are starting to rise.
It just means you're at the edge of getting divorced, or if not getting served papers already. And it takes that for you to go, maybe I oughta.
Well, and it's so important to set expectations. I feel like too, that's another one of those universal themes that comes with parenting. It comes with entering into a marriage. And my wife kind of had countless discussions leading up to our marriage and through the beginning of our marriage about how the dynamic in our relationship was going to be structured. And I always take her opinion into consideration. We always have discussions. There are certain realms of control that she has, but at the end of the day, we have decided that ultimately the decision falls in my hands. If there's something that I feel strong enough about to just completely argue with her about it to the point to where I say, no, this is how we're going to do it, then ultimately that decision is mine. But that also means that the consequences of whatever occurs are mine alone to deal with. Right. Make a decision financially that puts us at rock bottom. It means I got to go out in the street, you know what I mean, and make money or whatever. At the end of the day, I have to bring the money in,
Yeah, right. I actually, because she, like I said, she's very strong-willed, and has to like push and try to lead so often. But not to barter on women or females, but a lot of them don't really like to take accountability in a lot of stronger things. It's just a typical trait of a female, a woman. So she will want to lead and be the boss and make the decision, but then she won't want to take accountability for either the win or the fail. And I explained to her, I'm like, okay, go ahead. I'll let her eat dirt. All right, you want to be the boss? Fine, sure. You make the decision. And then she'll get to that point where she's like, well, what do I do? I was like, no. This is where you wanted to push. You had every opportunity to listen to what I had to say in the beginning. You decided not to, and now you want to make the decision, but you don't want to accept responsibility or accountability for your actions. Right. This is why, I tell you all the time, I'm happy to absorb your opinion and learn from you, but if you want somebody to lead this household, I make all the money. I repair the house, I pay the bills, I do all the finances, all that stuff. Everything falls on me at all times. And then you want to make the decision on what we do with this or that. That's not going to work, So, but I try, as like you said, we try to balance a lot of stuff, evenly between each other, where I take the majority of the lead on everything. So.
But I assume you also understand, perhaps undisclosed to her in those situations, that, at the end of the day, if you have to save family because of a decision she made, then that's your lot.
Right. I mean, I told her once, I was like, look, so it was something I was heard on social media. I forget who it was that said it, but they were talking about extremely controversial topics. Essentially, they said, men get their rights from God, essentially. They said, but women get their rights from men. I hate to say it, and I hate to be the bad guy, but if every single man on planet Earth collectively said women no more have rights, and they all have to sleep in cages, at the end, there's literally nothing that they can do about it. So
physical
right. Yeah, there is nothing they can do about it. They are at the will of every man on earth, because they physically cannot do anything about it. As well as intelligently, men typically are capable of leading. I'm not saying men are more intelligent. I mean, heck, the CEO of Lockheed Martin was a woman for like ever, so women are very, very intelligent, and just as intelligent as men. But typically men take the initiative to assert their dominance and intelligence, and that's typically why they're the ones that lead the majority of the time. And I try to explain that to her, and she just got mad. She's like, no, women can be just as good. I was like, yeah, but let me go lock every door and let's go in the middle of the living room and see who's going to win, So the truth is the truth, whether you like the truth or not. So, and I try to explain that to her, but I mean, she's receptive to it somewhat. With that, I mean, that's the general dynamic of it.
Sure.
It's general households. You only lead and take that stuff. I mean, essentially, because it lets you. So.
Well, it's interesting because I describe myself this way a lot. I'm not religious. I'm more of a theologian, right? So I study religion. I find religion fascinating. I'm not particularly religious. In that I don't subscribe to one particular religion as a belief, right? So that means that, oftentimes people make the argument that, well, these traditional marriages spawn from religious belief, religious foundation. Right. My wife's is not that way, right? I actually didn't start studying religion until years into our marriage. And so our dynamic was built simply as the most reasonable course of action, right? Because we provide different things to the marriage, not just physical aptitude on my part. I mean, which makes me a better laborer, but just and also obviously more empathic on her end, which makes her a better caretaker. But not just that, but just our personality characteristics, and that's true. Seems to be true across the board as an average when we study personality characteristics in men and women, right? And this is Peterson talks about this a lot, but like women tend to be more agreeable, men tend to be more disagreeable, and ultimately that that does put men in a better position, personality wise, to lead, because
Right.
they have that ability to exact control when
Right.
necessary, as opposed to
Just
just
assert that dominance when needed. Right.
right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want a lot of people, people listening to think I'm some sort of anti-feminist, hate
Sure.
women or nothing, because I am a firm believer in, a marriage is a combination, is two people as one. I absolutely, believe, my wife is equal in the household as me, even though I am the leader. Her opinion matters just as much as mine, is taken into account just as much as mine. But she takes my opinion, into account just as much as mine. So um, it is a two-part thing. It's a marriage between two people, a unity. It's not me, and then I keep my wife in a cage,
Right.
and she does what I tell her, and I only take her out when I need her for at nighttime. That's not the case at all. You know, uh, it is like I said, a two-person, marriage. It's a relationship between two people, and you can't, like you said, be a super authoritarian when you're,
Right.
in a marriage like that. And
Well,
Right.
but just ultimately, the truth is the truth. So,
on that same idea, too, one thing to touch on, and I've had this discussion with people, and this is the best way I've found to explain my belief. When it comes to mine and my wife's marriage, you could ask the question, "Are we equals?" And the answer would probably be yes. I mean, certainly. But at the end of the day, I view marriage kind of more like the Eastern concept of a yin yang, right?
mhm.
It's yes, you could ask the question, are the two sides of the yin yang equal? And I guess the answer would be yes, but ultimately the question is irrelevant because it's a single entity, right?
Right.
You
Mhm.
can't
Yeah.
compare equality within the same entity. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
The
Absolutely.
And,
question is almost irrelevant. Yeah.
like kind of to put it best how I can look at it is with my wife and I, you know, we both have great strengths in our preferred area.
Right.
If we looked at, my wife and I looked at our marriage as a business, I'd be the CEO, she'd be the CFO.
Right.
So, financial sides of it, we've gotten financially successful in thanks to her. She
Yeah.
has being an accountant, and I joke, being an Asian accountant, she has an advantage over a whole lot of other people. But
That's funny. My wife is also Asian, and she's very intelligent with our finances.
Hmm.
well, let's put it this way. My son was not allowed into a online Chinese course because he couldn't add double digits for kindergarten. But the kindergarten here that we took a tour of said that don't worry if your kid doesn't know how to say the alphabet.
Hmm.
We'll help him. I'm sitting there thinking, my kid can read first grade, almost second grade level at the beginning of kindergarten,
Hmm.
and his math is horrible. So I always joked he's a horrible Asian. And the but China, to get onto an online kindergarten math course, you have to be able to add 10 plus 10,
Right.
12 plus 12. You have to be able to do the math to be able to
Hmm.
get into kindergarten math for China. So
So the
that kind
standard.
of gives,
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say that kind of tells me why they're much better at
Hmm.
math.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
And I think if I remember some things I've been told is with them as well in Asian cultures, at a certain point, you don't just go to high school. You
Right.
have to be able to test into it. If you don't,
Mm.
then you go out to work or you go out to do something or you redo whatever, but you don't move up just
Yeah.
because you're at that level. It's either pass and then you have to pass into a certain area of expertise. So, like medical, finance, whatever
Right.
it is, then you branch off from there. And then you have to test to go into a college level
Yeah.
after that. So, it's not automatically you have the money, you can go to college. It's,
Right.
hey, if you want this, you have to test. So, they do hold higher standards.
Yeah.
But like I was saying with my wife, if her and I both are well understand, and as much as we both like to butt heads and say, well, I do this, I do that, we also both understand that if her and I didn't get married, there would be no way logically we'd be where we're at now.
Right.
Together, we've accomplished a whole lot. And
Mhm.
even with different cultural backgrounds, even with different beliefs on how things are done,
Mhm.
I mean, I've been told I shouldn't brag about my son as much. And my daughter, I have a feeling I'm gonna be bragging about her because both our kids are extremely smart. My son got kicked out of daycares because he figured out how to push a little one of those red cars with the yellow tops on them. I don't know if the two
Yeah.
coupes or something like that.
Yeah.
So at 3 or 4 years old, he pushed it against the gate, put a toy under the wheel, and climbed up and over. And they they thought because my son had language delay, speech delay, that he wasn't going to be smart. I'm sitting there going, what other kids are figuring out the mechanics to
Yeah.
create a toy into a ladder? And then, I mean, most kids escape because the teachers or the employee forgets to lock the gate, not because the kid figures out, hey, let's put this together, this together, this together.
Slide over.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you talk about bragging about your kids too. That kind of brings something to my mind too. I feel like it's much better to probably brag about your kids than it is to do the opposite. And
Right.
I see that a lot in a couple parents that I know that are in my social sphere. Uh, I They will talk about their kid in front of other parents in like a shameful way. Well,
Yeah.
Johnny the other day he just wouldn't listen, and the kid's right there, and I'm thinking to myself like, why? Like, why would you do that? And I don't know that the gentle parenting side would necessarily condone that, um, or the traditional parenting side would condone it. I don't really know, but it's just an interesting thought. You talked about bragging about your kids, almost like it was not like it was a bad thing, but almost like people would not necessarily look kindly on it. And it's like, well, I feel like that's not a bad thing. It's much better to brag about your kids in front of them than it is to talk bad about them. I mean,
Right.
that's
It's the
just
same with your wife.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Excellent point. Excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
I'd never say a negative word about my wife. And my mom
Right.
actually remarked on that a couple months ago. She's like, she goes, your wife never says anything bad about you. Like anytime, even if I'm bitching about you, she defends.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it's
Yeah.
mutual. It's a
Yeah.
mutual thing. I do this.
Even if you're not in front of her, even when you're separate discussing with, other people, strangers, coworkers, whatever, and you're not even around her, she's doesn't even know you're talking to somebody, you're at the store or whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Talking negatively about her, just, I mean, your kids, about her, about anybody, just ultimately puts a negative idea in your mind, which just ultimately further enhances negativity
absolutely.
towards her in the future.
Sowing the seeds, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's such an odd social convention, particularly in like male-dominated workspaces.
Right.
People talk about like, around the water cooler. I feel like men do that all the time. It's almost like it's just the standard for men to just kind of complain about their wives in front of other men.
Right.
I never understood that. I could never relate
Right.
for the exact reason you just described.
Right. I mean, ultimately speaking, you want your wife to treat you well, look up to you, want her to come to you for decisions and leadership and, masculinity and stuff like that. You want her to slide up on you in bed and do one of these. She's got to feel all those strong, enhanced feelings for you. And she's not going to get those strong, enhanced feelings for you if you don't have them for her.
Absolutely.
If you are shoving her to the side, oh, my wife, all she does is bitch. You do that stuff all the time. What's going to happen in your head? It's just going to continually and repeat and repeat and repeat. All my wife does is, blah, blah, blah. All my wife does is complain. All my wife does is this. All my wife does is that. So all you're going to do is have this negative mindset of her all the time. So when you go home, let's say you are getting frisky, maybe, things aren't working appropriately down below just because your negative mindset is there swelling inside your own head, and then, and not even in the moment, but what about the amount of times it happens? Maybe you used to, oh, why doesn't it work when we were dating? We used to do it 3, 4, 5 times a week. Now we only do it like once a month or once every 6 months. Well, more than likely it's because you probably have this negative mindset where you aren't initiating, but because you have that negative mindset and you aren't initiating, she's also not initiating, because it's a back and forth. So it's kind of just stretching and getting worse and worse and worse progressively. But when you ultimately think positively about your wife a lot, I mean, positivity grows. So does negativity. So
well, and I teach all the time, and not to touch on the NSFW topic too much, but when it comes to porn and masturbation, I teach young men all the time, like, look, this stuff is horrible for your relationships for the same reason that you just described there, because the more that you utilize these images of other women to create sexual arousal and sexual satisfaction in yourself, you're conditioning your brain to see those things as sexually arousing. And then on the other hand, when your wife is the sole source of your sexual satisfaction, sexual arousal, you're conditioning your brain to see the opposite, right? That your wife is the source of sexual satisfaction and sexual arousal in your marriage. And that's a powerful tool.
Yeah. And it's definitely something difficult for men to separate themselves from, if you're absorbed into it. I mean,
oh yeah,
you're a man, boobs are cool, so it's just hard to get away from it. It really is.
Well, like we were talking before, it's with the power of technology. Most times we're taught how to use technology in a negative way.
Yeah.
So, like, using technology, like Tom, I think you were talking about earlier, where you have some of your social media accounts stripped down to where you get just inspirational things and how-tos and good parenting and things along those lines, but the algorithm still throws in, because you're a male, your age, they throw in a half-naked girl. And even look at most of the online accounts you have, I can almost guarantee if you go in and look at the followers that anybody has, at least 5% of them are just fake accounts of girls that are half naked and all this. Oh yeah. I mean,
it's annoying.
I don't care if you're Facebook, if you're Twitter, if you're True Social, Mastodon, whatever's out there. If you go and look, technology tries to push porn and push sexuality outside the marriage, outside the home, because if you're not strong in your home, then you're going to be more easily manipulated by whatever person that feels like they want to get your attention. So, because if you don't have a strong home, you don't have a strong mind. And you could be smart, but if you don't have that sense of community in your house, and I'll say, when I got married, I think I heard Dennis Prager once said, when you get married, you become you start growing up. Once you have kids, you become a man. And his reasoning behind that is when you get married, you start having somebody else you have to concern yourself about, and you can't just walk away. My wife and I, we knew each other almost 4 months to the day that we got married. First date, she ran an hour late, and then 4 months later, her and I were at the church on time, all this. So, I mean, it's kind of a joke, but the fact is that if we would have waited, say, we would have got engaged, waited a year. Her and I have, again, a lot of cultural differences, a lot of different belief systems, all this, that if we would have started dating, got engaged, planned out the wedding for a year or what so have you, the likelihood of us actually getting married, because I'll be honest, I am not the easiest person in the world. I am a well-known ASS, and I've, especially back then, I've gotten a lot better, but In my younger years, I had anger issues. I was defensive about everything. So we fought a lot at the beginning of the marriage. And if we didn't have that bond where it says you can't just walk away,
Right.
we would have probably, fine, go wherever you want to go. I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to go to the bar, whatever. I think that technology is trying to push that connection away where people don't feel that they have a responsibility to hold to the marriage. They don't have that, I need to be faithful. I need to be this or that. I believe technology has its strong suit in places like you have AI that you can use if you use it reasonably. I'm setting up a course now to teach people the how to use AI for creation, but also to do it in an ethical way to where, say, like I did a test. I do food service design as my full-time job, at least right now until I win the lottery or find a perfect business solution to let me be more independent. But I did a experiment. I did a full book on food service design solely done by AI. And I was curious. It read well. I sent it out to my mom, say, hey, can you edit this book I wrote? Blah, blah, blah. She came back. She goes, you know, it sounds good, but it's this, that, and the other thing. She pointed out a lot of errors. And when I started talking to her about how I used AI to write it all, now mind you, I never published it. I thought about going through editing it, doing the whole process of it, but I realized if I want to write a book about food service, I'm going to sit down and actually write it myself because it's going to be more of a personal journey, not a just a how to.
How to.
But yeah, but I did it as an experiment and I used my
Mhm.
mom as the one to test it on. And if my mom's listening, I should apologize to her. Sorry. But the fact is she even, because the thought, like I said, was to edit it up and turn it into a real book, but I
Mhm.
just decided against it. But it's so easy to let technology do the work for you and create something, put it out there, don't look at it, just accept whatever it says. And then
Mhm.
it, doing that, you're letting technology decide your values, your views, how people perceive you. The
Yeah.
same thing with the accounts you follow, the people you respond to, the things that you say out in the internet. Most people, it's, I guess I can relate it to the first church I got kicked out of when I was a teenager, is most of the people, yeah, I've said it before on this, I've been kicked out of 5 churches. One because of a rumor, one because I dated the preacher's daughter, and 3 because the preachers didn't like the questions I asked.
That's a good
Mhm.
reason.
Because,
Yeah.
well, the 3 literally, I said, hey, I have these questions, and they couldn't answer them, so they thought I was trying to create trouble in the church, so they asked me not to return. I'm like, okay, fine. But it's, and for me personally, I've had my ups and downs with religion through my life. So when my wife and I first met, obviously I was non-religious as well. We kind of went back to religion, but it seems like
Let me
without a
step out.
almost
Step aside real quick.
not a
Wife's
problem,
calling me.
but it feels like technology is meant to destroy us in a way, and people don't know how to use it properly because they're now just letting technology determine who they are.
Right.
And you could easily, like I said, you could easily go back to having your feeds full of half naked women, and it's not that hard to do. It's actually harder to have a feed without that nowadays than it is with.
Right. Yeah, and that would happen purely just as a result of me being passive. So
Hmm.
you covered a lot of territory there, and I've been kind
Yeah.
of notes. So um, to kind of touch back on a few things that I found particularly insightful, you talked about the idea of influence in relation to a firm foundation. And I thought that was pretty fascinating because I don't know if I've ever considered that idea, but I find it interesting. That's true for parenting. It's also true in your marriage, where the firmer the foundation, of that relationship. And then it's an idea that I'm probably going to spend a little bit of time unpacking because, like I said, I find it pretty interesting. The firmer the foundation of that relationship with your child or with your wife, the less subject that individual is to outside influence, right? And that's probably like a universal law to some degree. And that's fascinating in relation to parenting because, the talking about that spectrum and finding your balance, like the better you are at finding your balance and strengthening that relationship and building that father-child relationship on a strong foundation, the more capable your child will be of going out in the world and protecting themselves against all this outside influence, like we see in technology, things like that. I talk about this a lot. One of the other things you talked about was the vows, and that's part of that firm foundation, right? The vows and the honor that you have associated with those vows and that promise you made. Peterson again talks a lot about. He's made the comment a while ago that really stuck with me that marriage is a lot like saying, no matter how I find out you actually are, I'm not going anywhere, and no matter how I find out that I actually am, you can't go anywhere either. And that's kind of in some ways why I feel like arranged marriages and things statistically are so successful, is because they're not necessarily based on love, which is in some ways a fleeting emotion, or lust or desire. They're based on this mutual understanding of the agreement that the two of you have made, right? And that's why vows are so powerful. And that's why I have a problem with the red pill community, or whatever you want to call them. They always comment on the fact that, well, divorce disproportionately affects men, particularly financially. That's absolutely true, but that's a good thing, especially for men, because it keeps us there, right? Men we're just much more inclined to leave, right, when things go awry, and that goes back to that disagreeable aspect of our personality, right? We're much more likely to just say, well, and walk away, and we kind of need that motivator to keep us there, right? Like, well, hang on a sec, let me just think this through. Maybe there's another solution. Maybe I can figure this out. I made a promise, or if I leave, I'm going to get whatever it is. It's like you just have to. Sorry for the cursing. You just have to kind of like it's motivation to stay to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It's no matter what the reason why it's effective. Kind of same way with some of the parenting strategies, and a lot of it too. You touched on this a little bit too. You didn't use this term, but I always use the term disposable culture, and we see that in our resources, right? I mean, all of our plates are disposable, our cups are disposable, everything is disposable.
Everything is nowadays.
DVD players are disposable, if those are even a thing nowadays. Everything is disposable, right? And relationships in some way are disposable, and that's a side effect of swipe culture and hookup culture and all this stuff, and that's not good. And that's a reason why people don't get married. It's a reason why relationships fall apart, is because we see everything as disposable. I'll move on to the next best thing. And
that's actually adjusted statistically, whereas men used to be so, like how you were talking about, men are so simple to walk away. It actually in the last 10 years have adjusted the other way. It's actually 78% of women file for divorce.
Yes, I was aware of that statistic. Yeah, and the reason that men aren't leaving, I think, is because of the fact that because I'd be interested to see how many men motivate breakups in non-marital relationships, and that would be a statistic that would be hard to find because people would lie. But
there's no paper, right? There's no paper trail.
But the marriage one doesn't surprise me at all, because men know, that if they leave, they're getting the raw end of the deal. And I think that the reason women are leaving is the man's fault anyway.
Half and half, I would say. I mean, I still believe, I'm a firm believer in divorces, regardless of who initiates it, is a 50-50. Women these days, I mean, years ago, sure, but these days, today, women are almost just as guilty as men in, promiscuity, even being egotistical, like how we were discussing earlier, even being women trying to be bosses and leaders and stuff like that. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but
doesn't work.
I'm not gay. I'm not interested in dudes. I want a chick. I want a woman. I want a female. I'm the man. So, and statistically, based on how people are today, women are with the whole feminist movement, pushed up to be the bosses and the leaders, and it's just not intuitive to society. It doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah, and that's certainly a certain position you could defend. I don't disagree with that. The reason I say that I think men are to blame, and the reason that I teach men often that it's your fault, you're the problem, is because there's power in that position, in that viewpoint. And I say that to mean that if I'm the problem, I can fix that. If my wife is the problem, I can't fix that, right? I can't change her. I can change me, or at least I'm much more readily equipped to change me. So I often make the comment that, well, men are to blame, and I say that almost in a way to kind of sow the seeds, like we talked about, right?
Yeah.
The more you repeat something, the more you kind of solidify
it. I do believe that men are the ones that can change it. Correct. I do believe that men are the ones that need to step up. And if say it is say if it's 100% women's fault, hypothetically, obviously, but let's say it's 100% women's fault. Women don't have the capacity to step aside and change this. It's men,
Well, and then
men need to step up, right?
Men are powerful. More powerful. There's no use in that point of view. And it's interesting too, because I feel like men are much more inclined to push blame anyway because of the ego. I mean, this goes all the way back to Genesis, and I find it fantastically enlightening in the book of Genesis when God confronts Adam about the consumption of the forbidden fruit. He immediately says, "Well, it was the woman that you gave me." Right? So he blames woman, and then he
blames the woman
immediately afterwards. And I was like, man, that's so enlightening, because that is
and that's exactly where men need to take that initiative and step up. When men are, I guess, what is it? When somebody waves the carrot in front of your face, you're like, "Ooh, go for the carrot." Men need to take the initiative and shut that stuff down in their own mind. Be a man. Turn, like how you were talking about, turn off the pornography, turn off the dirty movies, and even the Netflix with the stuff, may not be pornography, but it's, promiscuous, and maybe you need to turn that stuff off, cut down on the social media use that's, overly sexual or cool or funny, even the stuff like, maybe it's not promiscuous or sexual, but you see chick fights on Twitter and stuff, and they're like fighting, but their boobies falling out. It's there. So all that stuff is where you as a man need to take a step forward and stand up and be like, I'm just not going to do that stuff. If you don't get your mind settled into that stuff, and you go looking for women that are women, real women, that have similar traditional values that you have or want, then that's the type of relationship you're going to have. But if you go to the bar and meet some chick and eventually date her so long you marry her, this is where you find out she's doing the neighbor.
I'm gonna step in because there's one thing that was said that kind of got a little thought going in my head, where we're talking about admitting that we're wrong, this and that, stepping up, taking responsibility. And it's a fantastic concept to say that we need to work on that ourselves, but it's also something that, like, I realize the time change just happened this Sunday, yesterday, and I had no idea it happened. So literally, I wake up on Sunday mornings, I make pancakes and I feed my kids and all this, and I'm looking at the stove clock, and it's telling me that it's 8:30. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's go wake up the wife so she has a half hour to get around and be able to have some pancakes, blah, blah, blah. So I get up there, and she looks at her phone. She goes, it's 9:30. Well, I made the mistake. I messed up because I didn't look at my phone. I didn't look at the time. And my son, like I said earlier, he has a problem with saying I'm sorry when something goes wrong. His response is I'm sorry. And he goes, I'm like, come on, get your shoes on, let's go. We're running late. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. Did I make us late? I'm like, no, I messed up. I didn't pay attention to the time. You didn't do this, but I need you to move so we can get out the door, so we can get to church. Mommy can do the Sunday school teacher thing and blah, and and so that's a big thing that I try to at least on the call with Dad's account, and several times I say on here, is we also need to lead by example. So stepping up, taking responsibility, I could have said, it's fine, don't worry about it, let's just get going, instead of saying, no, I made the mistake. I didn't pay attention to time. It's not your fault. Let's get going. I'll take care of everything else. I think that's a big thing that men need to do as well, is, like you said, Mr. Pancake, model your what you want to your children as well, so that they don't have the hard time, because it's hard for all of us to say that we're wrong. That's obviously, like, I have to consciously think and tell myself, this is my mistake. I need to fix it. Because like you said, Tom, we all have huge egos. If we like to admit it or not, we all like to think that we're that big shining knight that's going to trample through the army.
How could I possibly be wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah, we do. It's true. You kind of touched on it a little bit too, and there's this quote that I heard a long time ago that I always thought was fascinating, and it kind of is like a core principle in my parenting style. Is the quote was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something to the effect of, "My father didn't teach me how to live a good life. He lived a good life and let me watch."
Yeah.
Damn, that is so powerful, you know. And I remember when I first heard it, I was like, whoa, like it just blew my mind, you know. And even this is like 10 years later, and I still think about that quote all the time. And you're right, you know, our kids are watching. And you talked about the reason it spawned my idea, or the thought about this, is because you were talking about, you know, taking responsibility, and how, you know, you could have easily just said like, oh yeah, whatever, let's go, it's fine. But your kid, trust me, even if he didn't recognize it consciously, he saw you take responsibility for the mistake, you know, and you're indirectly showing him what a man is, you know.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, it's not the easy thing for us to just do as men. Like you said, we have the ego. We want to we don't want our kids to see us as fallible, as, oh, we can make mistakes, but eventually they're going to realize we're human, that we're just a man and a woman, and their parents are doing their best. And kind of like I said on multiple occasions, that, and I think Mr. Pancake said it too, where you can have a friendship with your kids. That's important, but you are not your kids' friends.
Yeah.
You are their parents. And with how today's society is, I'm very hyper focused on the words used, because if you're more worried about being your kid's friend, you're not worried about being their parent and making sure they stay out of trouble. You're not worried about teaching those values they need to learn. And it's all these things that, as a parent, you have a greater responsibility, a greater power, that you have to focus so that your kid doesn't end up in jail, on a stripper pole, on God knows what.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've said before, you know, it's like a parent is not a friend, but a parent is a type of friend. You know,
right.
You know, boss is a type of friend in some respects, you know.
It's somebody that's friendly to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, like I've said this before, my mom is, outside of my marriage, my mom is my best friend at this point, because through everything I know she's there, this and that.
Sure.
But growing up, my mom, she beat me in front of a police station when I royally messed up. When that's a whole nother story I'm not going to go into this show on. If I cursed, she would pin me down to the kitchen floor and make me eat soap. And
love
it. I mean, trust me, those are not something my friends would ever do.
Right.
You know, if they did, it would have been a whole different reaction from me towards them on it.
And it's probably not something you would do either. I mean, to be fair,
right?
But at the time, it was the convention, and and you know, you could argue as to whether or not it was right, but clearly it was effective. I mean,
yeah,
but, right, it seems. So
Yeah, I mean,
we all
I've
have
had my
baggage.
bumps. Yeah,
Our parents, no matter how hard we try, I always make the joke like, no matter how hard my parents tried, yeah, they f***ed me up a little bit, and I'm gonna f*** my kids up a little bit. I'm positive of that. No matter, I mean, I'm gonna try not to, but it's kind of inevitable to a certain degree. I mean, just
Yeah.
relationship that you have with your kids is so vital and so influential and so right, all these other adjectives to describe it, but it's like at its very core, it is part of your child's very core, and something with so much impact is gonna come up a little bit,
Yeah.
somehow, right?
right.
Yeah.
The goal inevitably is, I mean, you're gonna, every kid's gonna get a little bit of something, mentally damaged somehow. It's
Right.
it's such as life, but
Yep.
the goal is to make your children need to be better than you were. But the ultimate goal.
True. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That it's just every step needs to get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Even if it's only this much, still needs to be a little bit better.
And many families go in the opposite direction, and that
Right.
comes down with like building that family dynasty, whatever term you want to use. I don't know, dynasty
Yeah.
is a term, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Foundation.
you talked
Ye-
just real quick, one thing, a funny story, because you talked about this with your mother. I remember this story. I was young. I was probably, I don't know, 6 maybe, and my mom was actually the disciplinarian in my household. My dad was actually very passive, and my mom would beat my ass with a belt, right, if I stepped out of line, and I was scared of my mom to a certain degree, and I loved her. We talked about the balance. So
Right.
I remember I was about 6 years old, and she had people over, friends over or something, and I was playing Walker, Texas Ranger. I wanted to dress up as Walker, Texas Ranger, and I was playing by myself, just doing my thing. I was an only child, and so I was looking for my belt. Like, I had this belt that my grandpa got me with a big belt buckle on, and I couldn't find it. And I'm looking all over. It's in the second drawer. It's in the second drawer. I stuck it there. I know it's there. And I go up and I look, and I came down multiple times. It's like, it's not in there. I looked, and she goes, if I come up there and it's in that drawer, I'm going to beat your butt with it. And I said, okay. I said, if it's not, can I beat yours? And she goes, sure. She's so frustrated. Sure. And so she goes upstairs, and it was in the bottom drawer. It wasn't in the And I remember she could have easily have just been, let it go, whatever. No, you're not, go play or whatever. But she let me hit her with the belt. I remember. And how hard can a 6-year-old hit? But yeah,
Right.
and now, as an adult looking back on the story, I think like, man, that had to be so hard to let her beat go. And she made this agreement with me, no matter how insignificant it was, and she stuck.
She
And
stuck
to
to
this
it.
day, man, the
Stuck to
trust
her word.
I have in my mother is like unfathomable, because she's never lied to me. She's always stuck to her agreements, and it's just, I can't always say that to my father.
My daughter puts me in timeout actually all the time. Yeah, it's, well, bad words are timeout. We try not to spank for small little nuances,
Fair.
especially since I'm ex-military. Before military, I worked construction. You know what I mean? So cursing is like the second language for me. I've gone out of my way to lessen my cursing in the past few years, but cursing is like a second language for me. So due to that, hey, you don't say bad words, you get timeout. Well, you say bad words, okay, well then I'll go to timeout. That's what we do. I say bad words, and yeah, she grabs me by my arm and walks me over there, and she sit down, and she actually does one of these, and yeah, I let her do it, because it fair is fair. I stick to my word. She knows, bad words are not accepted in this house, and
I love that.
if we're gonna say them, we have to accept our consequences.
That's awesome, man. She'll never forget that. That's my story, man. She'll never forget that. Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture your big self that you are, because other people can't see you, but just looking at you, seeing a little 5-year-old girl grabbing your hand. I mean,
for reference, about 6'1" and 250 pounds.
Yeah.
So she is probably God, I don't know,
Probably 40
maybe
pounds at 5
three.
years old.
Yeah, she's about 40 pounds, and she's what, 3 feet or so. I can't.
I love
You
it.
know,
I'm on, Dad.
she's less than my
Uh,
waist.
You know the rule. You know the rule,
Yeah,
Dad.
and her. I mean, obviously you can't tell here, but her whole hand can't. It almost can't touch all the way around my finger. She grabs my finger, her fingers barely touch. I mean, you probably can't really tell, but yeah, my hands are thick and big.
That's just funny. Well, let's do this. We've actually been talking for well over an hour now, and I I say this on a lot of shows because obviously Mr. Pancake and I can talk for hours on end. We're both just full of it at times, but Tom, with
Yeah.
you, there's a lot of topics I'm seeing that we're drifting into, and
Mhm.
there's there's a lot of different things, and it's been a fun conversation. Other than editing out all the cuss words, it's been
We have a beep
it's
button.
been oh, trust me, I already have the bleep file. I know where it's at, so I
Yeah.
can grab it and put it into the edit. So that's not a
All right.
problem. But
Mhm.
with that said,
That's my fault, by the way.
we're gonna end this. We're gonna end this for everybody else. I'm definitely gonna figure out a time to have you back on so we can go more into this because
I love that.
it's this conversation is definitely not over by any means.
Sure.
So while people's waiting for you to come back on, I know we found you on Twitter or X. Where do you suggest people find you if they want to find you or if they want to contact you to because you said you do coaching, where do you want them to reach out to you at?
So you can find me on Twitter at Earn Her Respect. Okay, that's the main source of contact for me. There's a link at the top of the page. You can set up a time to talk with me one-on-one if you're interested about coaching. There's also a link up there to get on my email list. So I've got an ebook that's coming out here probably 6-7 months from now. It's going to be pretty expansive, so we've got a lot of time to work on that still. There's going to be a smaller version of that that's going to be coming out for free, kind of as like a little teaser. But other than that, you can find all my content on there. It's free to follow. I appreciate any kind of follows that anybody wants to throw my way. So, yeah, that's pretty much right now what I got going on. I'm going to be putting out some courses too, but that's not been fleshed out entirely yet. But that'll definitely be coming in the future. Just, more easily accessible for some people than the one-on-one coaching. So,
All right. And Mr.
Awesome.
Pancake?
Yeah, same. Yeah, I mean, you know me. The pancakeswithyourdad.com is definitely the main central location. All the social medias and everything else. There's a few things that are being built on the website that's coming up new as well. But same places, Twitter or X, whatever you call it. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's only one Pancakes with Your Dad on Twitter. Facebook. We do have an Instagram, even though there's like nobody there. True Social, and I do have a LinkedIn as well. Those are all the best places, and definitely contact me on all of them.
Sounds good. And for anyone that doesn't realize this, and if you're listening to a show and you've listened to several, I don't know how you don't know it, but Call with Dads, you can go to callwithyourdads.com or callwithdads.com, not call with your dads. So callwithdads.com. We have our blog there. We've actually started working with teaming up with some people to do affiliate links. So if you want to build like Lords of X is a group that is trying to build helping dads and men get more traction so that their message gets out there. If that's what you're looking for doing, click on the link. Clicking on these affiliate links do help us grow, help us put money into the account so that we can put towards getting Mr. Pancake a better mic, doing buying services that help us get better better ability to serve the audience, and it's sponsoring you as well because you're getting stuff out of it. Like we have a affiliate link for Leonardo AI, which is a image creation. If you look on Call of Dads, I'd say about 90% of the images there on our social medias, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, are all done with AI image creation. And those are things that you can use. You can use the paid service. And if you do so, using our affiliate link does help us grow, and this is why we're doing it. I'm working on a homeschooling affiliate link that hopefully by the time this comes out, everyone can click on there, and it's a affiliate link that if it works out, it's one that I personally use. All these are publicists that personally use. Lords of X, for an example, Tom, Mr. Pancake, and I are all there. So we can vouch for that as well. And like I said, Leonardo AI, I use myself. I think Mr. Pancake is working on Sherwood Entertainment for
Yeah.
your.
Yep. I have the link for it. I gotta build up the thing for it on the website. But it's Sherwood Kids. If you guys all know, Save Your Sons on X and Facebook and LinkedIn, the guy who runs that's a pretty cool guy. But he started that Sherwood Kids thing where it's all like wholesome content for children, so you don't really have to you know, see your kid seeing something inappropriate, like a YouTube ad that's not for kids and stuff like that, or kids shows even that show inappropriate stuff. We'll go into what that inappropriate is, but the stuff that they have on that show or on the Sherwood Kids is all like wholesome content. So that's the kind of goal. But I'm working on that as well. That should be out probably the next week. I'll have it on my site.
Perfect. Well, with that said, Tom, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, I've enjoyed it. I am definitely going to figure out when we can have you on again because, like I said, this is far from over.
That sounds right.
And
Look forward to it.
I don't mean that to sound ominous. This is far from over.
It's far from over.
But in the sense of we definitely need to carry this conversation on more.
Sounds
So,
good.
Mr. Pancake, Tom,
For sure.
myself, we all appreciate everyone that's listening. And you need to
Absolutely.
check out Tom. You'll find his links in the show notes. So you can go to X, Mr. Pancake and I's links there, and I'll even have the affiliate links that we currently have all in the show notes. So feel free, click on the links, go visit us, visit the affiliates. And with that said, thanks. You guys have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.